Senator Solibai has been a very good friend of Washington and Jefferson College, and we're honored to have him here today to do this introduction.
Thank you, Diane, and good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor to have the opportunity today to make this introduction to someone I like to call a remarkable American. And even though there's a lot of his bio within the program, some things I've highlighted I'd like to just bring to your attention. When General Wald retired in 2006 from the Air Force, he left as a four-star general with a career that spanned over 35 years. He served the U.S. military as a command pilot with over 3,600 flying hours, 430 of those being combat hours over Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Iraq, and in Bosnia. General Wald embarked on his military career while he was in college at North Dakota State University, earned his commission through the Air Force to the ROTC program in 1971. And over his 35 years, General Wald had combat time as a air controller through the Vietnam era, an F-16 pilot over Bosnia, an instructor pilot, and an F-15 flight commander. General Wald commanded the 31st Fighter Wing at Aviano Air Base in Italy, where in 1995 he led one of the initial strikes of ammo depots in Bosnia. General Wald serves in a number of organizations that focus on moving our energy towards a more secure footing in regards to energy. He also serves today as a leader of Deloitte's Federal Government Services Department of Defense Practice. There his responsibilities are as a senior leadership director of strategic and relationships with the U.S. Department of Defense. In addition to this, his expertise on international energy security policy, General Wald is also a subject matter specialist in weapons procurement and deployment of counterterrorism. It is my honor, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce our keynote speaker, General Charles Wald.
Thank you, Senator. I really kind of like this Wald guy. I never heard about him before. Only senators can make somebody sound good like that. When I was a 14 round deck, now they have 7 rounds. The same number of draft decks, but they have twice as many teams. But the number 1 pick in my draft was Perry Bradshaw. So some of you probably know him. Perry did okay. He's probably making $1 million. Where's the senator for information? So I'd like to thank President Smith for the vision. First of all, set the center up, and we had a chance to have a wonderful lunch at her beautiful home just before we came over here, and had a chance to listen to the senator talk a little bit about the school and her passion about education at the school itself. I'll tell you what, you guys are punching way above your weight here for leadership in this university with her there, so she's great. Diane Stairs, thank you, wherever she is, probably working, doing a good job. I don't know, Heather left, I guess she's probably back to school, but her mom's here. I thought that was impressive too. And then I'd like to thank Joe Plodger for being here. He was my colleague from Deloitte and works in Pittsburgh, in a wonderful place, the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Building. So anyway, great to be here. So I listened to the panel earlier, and that was interesting. There's a couple things that come to mind when I see hear the panel and we talk to other people. And when I was in European Command, as was mentioned earlier, I was the deputy commander for European Command when I retired. And that basically was 92 countries. We had under us mostly Europe, Russia, the Atlantic, all of Africa. And Jim Jones, who was the National Security Advisor, was also the NATO commander and was my boss. And he spent most of his time in NATO and I did the US side of that. And when we got there in 2003, 2002 actually, from 1990 to 2002, 1990, most of you recall, was really kind of the end of the Cold War, manifested by the fall of the Berlin Wall. But NATO and Europe, and the United States in this case, hadn't even thought about strategy since 1990. We just kind of showed up. We had 150,000 troops in Europe. I'm being a little bit hyperbole here, but generally we have not changed our strategy. And General Jones and I and the other 4 stars, 6 of us over there, got together in a meeting and said, we got to think about why we have 150,000 U.S. troops in Europe. And it's not because we're going to fight the Russians in what was called the Fulda Gap at that time, for those that remember being in Europe. And so one of the things came up that it's an energy, we have a new paradigm we're living in today in the world. We are today specifically in the United States, but all globally, we have a different security environment, and we need to face that. So this is not about the energy specifically, but I just want to make a comment about U.S. defense spending and where we are today in the world. The world that we know it has changed. Now, I think the euphemism for the world changing is 9/11. Everybody remembers that. I was in the Pentagon that day. I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. But the world changed on 9/11. It woke us up. So in 1989, when the Polish elections occurred, that was when the end of the Cold War occurred, because Poland became pretty much democratic democracy. And then the Berlin Wall fell. That was a symbolic thing. And from that point on, the world started to change for about, for those of you that read a lot of this, there was an individual named Francis Fukuyama who wrote an essay called The End of History. And his premise at that point was the United States is the sole superpower in the world, and we are now hitting what I would call utopia because we can do basically whatever we want. That lasted about 10 seconds. And then we became multipolar, right? And that's been happening. And now the world we live in is really changing dramatically. Not just energy. Energy is kind of a part of that, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But a bunch of things are changing. What is called Westphalian model, which is the nation state, is prominent, is changing. Now we have corporations that are prominent globally. You're going to see some of those in a minute here, some of the old companies. You have individuals. You know, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are basically gross domestic products in their own right. They are influential. You have nonprofits out there that have huge influences, and let's say global economies. And they're all interconnected. And so now the threats that we face from the U.S. military standpoint, and some of our ROTC brethren are out there, so you're going to have to live with this, is much more complex. It isn't just a Russia-U.S. or Russia-China thing, even though we want to make China the big movie now. They're going to be a problem, but it isn't the issue. The biggest danger we have in the world today are unpredictable, sweeping social issues that cause problems in places. And those are manifested somewhat by the extremists that, it's not only that, but extremists come from there. So you have a threat today that's basically a suicidal individual that has no laws or no borders. That's dangerous. That's what we face. We're not going to fight the Russians in combat. We're not going to fight the Chinese in combat. We're not going to do a land war in our lifetime. We're going to face different threats. So that's my number one premise, and you can read this slide as well as I can. This one got a little bit out of whack here, isn't it? Let's go back. Okay. So this was talked about a little earlier, and I'm not going to, argue whether I know the exact facts or not. And one thing I'll say about energy security that we should all remember is everybody has a little bit different number. But if they're in the ballpark, about 80–90% is probably good enough. And so my numbers, if you want to argue them, fine, go ahead, but I can prove to you that my numbers are as good as anybody else's. For those that think they can get down to a 1 million barrel differential on oil per day, they're wrong. So they're trending. So the trend is for the demand for more oil in the world for the next years, in our lifetime, I would say. China and India are going to demand more energy than we could actually produce in a real efficient way in the future. Even with the things we'll talk about in the United States, with the increased shale oil or the increased ability to develop crude oil out of the Bakken, find wherever we might find it. So we're going to go from about 80, which was mentioned today, you can argue whether it's 86, 89, 90 billion barrels a day in the world, to somewhere around 130 by 2030, maybe 120. And so you think about that's a 30 or 40 million barrel per day increase. We're at 88 now, that's significant. And so we're going to talk about what you can do to displace it. But the United States uses arguably anywhere from 18 to 22 of that. That's about 1/4 of the energy in the world today of the crude oil. That's a lot. And so again, you can go back and you can make your argument about the points, but generally the trend is still the same. We use a lot. There isn't that much. There's going to be a bigger demand, we've got to produce more. And that's what's going to happen whether we like it or not. And you can see our trend there, even though good things are happening. I was, as mentioned by the Senator, involved in a group called Securing America's Future Energy. We advocated for mileage standards for vehicles to be 35 miles per gallon. That helps, things like that. Those all help because you got to do them all. So one of the implications a minute ago was that by certain people, when they talk about certain different fixes, is that there's a silver bullet solution to our energy problem. And what I like to say is we don't. We have a silver buckshot solution. You got to do a whole bunch of things and do them all. You know. Now I will say, and Andrew's doesn't need any defense, maybe he's gone, but there's an environmental issue here too, whether we like it or not. And you know, I'm Adam Smith, free economy person all the way. You know, I also love America, and I kind of a crazy guy because I think the environment's pretty important too. I like clean environment, and I don't think we should ruin it if we can help it. So I don't believe us messing up the environment from an energy standpoint is a hoax. I mean, I know Senator Inhofe is a friend of mine, but he thinks I'm crazy because I think, you know, polluting the air with carbon is an environmental issue. I do, whether I like it or not. We did a study in Washington with 14 retired 4-stars. These are guys from all walks of life. And at the end of the study, we concluded that because of climate change, whether it's man-made or not, in the future is going to be a big security issue for all of us. And I've had this happen to us already, where in places like Mogadishu, or not Mogadishu, but Mozambique, the whole country, literally, these countries are huge. Because of the double typhoon process that happened in the Pacific, the entire country flooded. Now this is not a state, this is like Texas. And so, how do you actually help people like that in normal ways? The United States military had to go there with helicopters. And every time there's a disaster like that around the world, whether it's a tsunami, an earthquake, whatever, the U.S. military shows up. Why? Because we can, and we're good people. So that's going to have to be something we watch in the future. But I didn't want to talk about environmental issues, that's somebody else's issue. But it's important for us to remember that what you'd like to do and what you have to do are many times two different things. What we'd like to see and what we're going to see are two different things. And even though the United States is still hugely influential in the world, we don't control our destiny as much as we used to. And so we're going to have to face some realities and facts. At lunch we were talking about politicians and who's right and who's wrong, and why don't we do certain things here and there. And it sounds good on paper until you get there. I mean, I go up to the Hill all the time in Washington to talk to senators and congressmen because they actually do things besides look stupid. They actually work for the United States, they're good people. They have a problem, just like your senator here. He's got a constituency he's got to answer to. If you guys don't like him, he's not a senator anymore. He's representing you. And that's part of the issue. I mean, we need to be realistic about these things. Now, the good news is, things are getting better from and I'm not going to belabor this because it was talked about significantly by Annie and Brill and Andrew. But we all know Marcella. I mean, you know, Marcella is euphemistic with Pennsylvania, it's euphemistic with, oh boy, we're not going to have to worry about those crazy Saudis anymore. We're going to have our own energy and we're going to make our own decisions. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Or the Bakken find in North Dakota. I'm from North Dakota. I've got 4,000 acres of mineral rights out there. I can't wait, okay, right now. But the fact of the matter is, North Dakota, where I grew up, played football there, was really kind of a destitute state. Probably one of the last in the nation for economic growth. People didn't want to move there, I guarantee you. Kept the riffraff out, but it's tough life over there. And it wasn't really any surplus. Now they have an economic surplus, they have population growth, and they have a 2.2% unemployment. is a good thing. It's good for North Dakota. So it's coming. XL pipeline, right? Keystone. It's coming, probably. Those are all good things. You know, the Wakanda that was mentioned, I'll show you in a minute. Offshore drilling. You name it. Those all need to be done. At lunch we were talking about perspective. And I think perspective on energy security is an important thing. So you see the numbers here and you can make your own conclusion. Things are getting better. But in America there, I think the last count, and it's kind of like censuses, you don't get the exact number, but it's about 260 million now, light vehicles and cars in the United States. That's 1.4 vehicle per eligible driver. I mean, just think about it. When you drive around Washington or you drive toward Pittsburgh or whatever, next time you do that, think about it. Just put in your mind, look for gas stations and cars. They're all over the place. And that's one city. They're all over the United States. There's 260 million of those in the United States, cars. That's 1.4 light vehicle per eligible driver in the United States. It's a lot of vehicles. In China, there's 4 cars per 1,000 eligible drivers. Now, somebody mentioned China about not wanting candy, I think it was, not wanting to ride bicycles. I'll guarantee you, they're going to buy a lot of cars. So is India. You know, when you look at China and India, they have 1 billion each more people than we do. And they probably have 1 billion worth of people that want to have a car. And they're not going to be electric necessarily. They could be, but not all of them. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. They're going to be kind of like the cars we have right now. Right now they're buying gas vehicles. So the demand is high, the pressure is high, and that's a global issue for all of us, and it's security. Now, you know, the condo, just kind of an anecdote. I'll tell you a couple of anecdotes as we go through. It's probably more fun for you than just hearing the facts. But one of them is when they opened up the BP well in the Gulf back a couple years ago, just before it blew up. This group again, SAFE, I was asked to go to the presentation by President Obama. It was at Andrews Air Force Base right in Washington, D.C. there. And the president gave a speech in the hangar. I was sitting right up front. All the service chiefs were there, the 4 stars, all the service secretaries, which oil, energy people. Secretary Salazar, the Interior Secretary, was there, the Secretary LaHood, Transportation. All the Muckaties were there. And the president gave a good talk, and he had an F-18 Super Hornet fighter jet sitting behind him. It was called the Green Hornet, because the Navy was going to use biofuel for their aircraft, which is a cool thing. So they had a pretty neat sales pitch. It was called the Green Hornet. They're going to have the Green Fleet. That's still coming. Secretary Davis in the Navy has declared by 2020 they'll have 50% of their fleet will be green, which means clean. Now, when you use nuclear energy for the carriers, it helps, but the fact of the matter is they're going toward that area. So it's pretty dramatic. It was on TV. There's a fighter aircraft sitting behind the president who says, we're going to start drilling offshore. And we're going to do it, you know, with offshore, outer continental shelf drilling is what the issue is. And it was a big deal for President Obama. I'm not a Democrat, by the way. So it's not like I'm shilling for the president. It's just a big deal for him because it's an issue from the standpoint that most Republicans like to drill, and a lot of the Democrats are more environmentally. So he's making this accommodation saying we need energy, and we'll do it smart. 2 weeks later, it blew up. Jim Jones, who was my friend, National Security Advisor, told me personally, he said, Chuck, I know that's not true, but it's almost like it was sabotaged. I mean, the luck of it was unbelievable, you know. So that changes things. The politics, you can't get over the politics, whether you like it or not, you know. So we've got to be kind of fair about things. The reality of there's politics, there's science, which we're going to talk about a little bit like by Rolla. Matter of fact, I want to talk to you a little later and say, how do you figure out the license for how far you go through the pipe, right? And as an example, for most of you were probably live during the first Gulf War, some of the other students probably weren't, but most of us in here were in 1990. The reason that started, I bet you most people in here don't know. The reason that started was because of the invasion of Kuwait. But the reason they invaded Kuwait, Iraq, is because the Kuwaitis, or the Iraqis, I should say, believed the Kuwaitis were drilling into Iraq and stealing their oil. That's why the first Gulf War started, as a horizontal drilling, which most people don't know. Those an energy issue, right? And we'll talk about that. So, okay, so then you say, let's get a bunch of wind, let's get a bunch of geothermal, let's get a bunch of solar, and we can fix this problem. We just gotta be dedicated to electric cars and stuff like that, which I'm an advocate for also, but 1% of the vehicles in the United States out of that 260 million are hybrids or electric. 1%. So it really is hard to get the market to shift and change. The amount of renewables we use, even though it's been highly emphasized, I'm a big fan of it. The more the merrier. The better we do, the better. You know, we can get. I'm on the Lawrence Livermore National Lab Scientific S&T Advisory Board, and I was out there 3 weeks ago for our meeting, and they have what's called the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. It's the most innovative, cool thing I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen some cool things. And this thing is it's a $6 billion building. It's about 2 football fields long. It has 192 lasers. They all go down and they do their magic. They hit in this little eraser-sized gold tube that has a droplet of frozen deuterium, and they hit this thing, and it's a simulation of nuclear explosion. And the reason they're doing this is so they can do nuclear testing without doing a nuclear weapon, because we want to have credibility of our stockpile. The beauty of that is if you do this a whole bunch of times, like 10 times a second, you can start building through a process of heating up a sleeve of salt inside. You can actually start making energy through steam energy. And that's going to happen. It's called the Life Facility. It's 1/4 the cost of nuclear energy. It's kind of like nuclear, but it's 1/4 the cost. But it stops for some reason. You don't have nuclear waste. There isn't any nuclear waste. So it's kind of like too good to be true. But it could happen. And if it does, that facility in Lawrence Livermore, for example, could power the city of San Francisco. That's how much you get out of that. It is $3 billion a pop. That means you get 4 of those for a new power plant. You don't have waste, so things are kind of cool on the horizon. That's going to be a game changer for the United States, those types of things. Where do we get it from? It was hit on earlier, but you just need to look at the slide a little bit. The bigger the arrow, the more the oil. You know, through the Straits of Hormuz, Andrew talked about this, and I'm going to talk about Iran in a minute. 17 million barrels a day. Now, there's 88 million barrels of oil that are used in the world every day. Not all of it's transported. I mean, we make our own, and we keep some at home. So out of the 17 million that comes through the Straits, that's a huge portion of the transportable oil in the world every day. And somebody mentioned the cost of oil. I think there's a question back over here earlier about what's the real cost of oil at the pump, kind of tax and all that. Now, people don't like me to say this because I don't know why they get angry about it, but it's the truth, okay? So the RAND Corporation did a study a couple years ago, about a year and a half, and I've been saying this for years, and they finally validated what I thought was true. The United States, you all here, in Europe, how many, you don't have to raise your hand, but for those who have been to Europe, gasoline is expensive. It's $7 or $8 a gallon over there, which is ridiculous, but that's what it is. Now, you don't know this, but you're paying for their oil. If I were you, I'd be angry about that. But if you look at how much money we spent in the Persian Gulf, not counting the Gulf War, either 1 or 2, or Afghanistan, but just being there, is $65 to $85 billion. So if you take that and extrapolate, that means you're paying $9 a gallon for gas. If you want to take that as the reason I think we're there is energy. I mean, if it wasn't for that, Israel, and we could protect Israel from the Mediterranean, my contention is the only reason we're hanging out in the Persian Gulf is because of energy. You can argue whatever you want. Now it's changed a little bit because of Iran, but for those years, if you want to translate, you're paying for your military, which we all want to, but in this case, you're out to defending the world oil supply. You're paying a lot for a gallon of gas. And when I was at National War College at NBU, is where Hayden gave his talk yesterday about strategy. That was in 1990, and I first realized what we were doing globally, the United States of America, to protect the lines of communication, these shipping lines, etc. And my euphemism is we dial 1-800 US Navy every time there's a problem around the world to get the oil, assured. So that's not all bad. I mean, it sounds simple and it's kind of emotional to say that. But the fact of the matter is you're paying for global energy security. Nobody else, hardly. We get a ship here and there from one of the countries out there will help once in a while, but generally speaking, it's the U.S. doing this stuff. And that costs us. And so the beauty would be, this argument about let's become independent, which is really kind of a fun thing to say. It would be great to be energy independent. You just can't do it because the global energy market, as was talked about earlier, gets complicated. It goes back to this whole question about, I'm glad Bill isn't here because, you get economists, they got two hands, right? On the one hand and on the other hand. And so there's always these arguments. I took economy in college, I was a business major, and half the stuff didn't make common sense, but it actually worked. So it isn't intuitive, but there's these issues there. But you can look there, so the Straits of, let's see here. Oh, there you go. That isn't the laser on top.
It's the very top.
Anyway, Straits of Malacca there, that's about 11 million barrels right there. So between the Straits of Hormuz, which is right off Iran there, and then Malacca, that's 28 million barrels a day. So you get into this kind of dangerous dependency. Now, the good news for us, for those who have read, I recommend this, and I'm not shilling for Dan Gergen, but there's a book called The Prize, P-R-I-Z-E. It's a great book. I enjoyed it. I thought it would, but I loved it. And it talks about how oil became the dominant fuel that we use in the world over the years and all the different intricacies. The time when Churchill actually changed the world when they decided to change the British fleet from coal to oil. That was a big change. But in the Prize, the whole issue is the East-West issue and how the Middle East has become. Well, now Dan Gergen has written a book called The Quest. And The Quest says what's going to happen, and I believe this, it doesn't say we're going to become energy independent, but it's going to say we're going to become more dependent on the north-south energy issue here with Canada, with the XL and the tar sands, or oil sands, whatever you want to call them. The United States finding the ability to actually extract more oil and get to the hard oil. I'm told, and maybe Royal can verify this, but in the United States there's kind of usually about 3 layers of oil. We've only gotten about layer 1 because of depth and other things. And then you've got Brazil, which has an unbelievable offshore find on oil. It's very difficult to get to speed. But if that starts happening, I mean, I trust Brazil more than I do some of the Middle East countries, so that at least it would be, and by the way, if we become an exporter, it doesn't mean we don't have same dependency, it just means we make more money, which I love. I mean, I'd love to become the Saudi Arabia of oil, so we can spend money on schools and stuff, and they can spend it on golden airplanes or something. Again, numbers, figures lie and liars figure, but the point here is just the magnitude of the oil around the world and who uses what and who produces what. Now, that's going to change a little bit now because all the things we just said, but it's not going to change totally. And the one that kind of gets me is, Chevron, Exxon, and Mobil are our favorite friends. Exxon is the biggest single company in the world, by the way, from the standpoint of gross revenue. And you add those 3 up, I mean, the ones that aren't so friendly with us, or maybe don't like us at all, or have different types of politics, adds up to around 90% of the energy in the world. And those are nationally owned. So, like I said, Adam Smith, you name it, Ayn Rand, all free markets. But the fact of the matter is, oil is not a free market. It's basically run by, just like in Rolla and we're talking about, by national companies that want to make money. Just like if we had it, we probably would do the same thing to them. So the idea that just let the world economies take care of itself doesn't work either. It's a little more complex than that. You just can't blow it off. The fact of the matter is, I mean, if you want to trust Saudi Arabia for our national security, I'm not with you. I mean, somebody else can do that, but not me. I love to show this picture because that light gray airplane in there, I've actually flown that airplane, so I'm in Pittsburgh, Germany. But this is at the end of the first Gulf War, and it's kind of a dramatic picture, but it shows the fact that this reminds us of what we've done with energy and our national security over the years. And you can read the chart as well as I can, but these implications are still there today. You know, even though we're pulling out of Afghanistan here next year, we've left Iraq pretty much. The Middle East stays volatile. Iraq's not solved, Syria's on its, you know, whatever, and Iran's coming. And if you look at Iran, and I'm not here to kind of go one over the world on geostrategic problems, but Iran is a big problem. I mean, because of their location primarily. And Iran has the ability to, at least temporarily, shut this little Strait of Hormuz, for example. This chart's a couple years old. You could update it from the standpoint, it wouldn't be $200 a barrel, it'd probably be $400 a barrel. We're at 110 today, aren't we? Something like that. So when you look at Sweet Texas crude, I think it's about $110 a barrel, something like that today. If the Straits of Hormuz were closed, I predict we could go over $300 a barrel for a period of time. And then you know, it takes a little time to gin up the production for Saudi Arabia. They've got a couple of million capacity extra. You know, Iraq is coming online, but they're not there yet. And Libya is trying to get online, and they're not there yet. And so if the straits close, which I think the Iranians could do for a period of time, it wouldn't be very long, but they could, that will send jitters through the market. We'll be paying a lot of money for oil. Now, that's one thing. Now they have a nuclear weapon coming out, which changes really everything. Because if you're like me, you probably aren't interested in Saudi Arabia or Egypt having a nuclear weapon, which if Iran gets one, they'll get one. Saudi Arabia already has one on reserve up there, I guarantee you. And I'm not interested in a country that has the potential of having their leadership fail and turmoil in that country have loose nukes. It's bad enough for thinking of Iran in that way, or Pakistan, let's say. So it's a problem. And what that means to all of us is I think we're not going to leave the Middle East for our lifetime, probably. We're going to have that $65 to $85 billion of extra money to keep the Persian Gulf safe, even after the Iran situation is resolved, for the rest of the time that we're probably alive. And we're going to be paying a lot of money. So the issue is we need to, in my estimation, figure out every possible way we can to produce as much energy as we can, and then do it in a smart way. So you don't pollute the land with the frack or the water. You can clean up the petroleum use in a certain way. You can do a lot of things, but we have to face it. You know that we're going to have to live with this. It isn't just we just don't have a silver bullet thing. It's a bad thing. This is an interesting picture that's going to talk a little bit about the implications of the military energy. This is the Khyber Pass in between Afghanistan and Pakistan. I was at the Khyber Pass, that spot, 7 days before 9/11. And for those that remember here, things were getting ugly with Osama bin Laden, and we were trying to make friendly with the Pakis and things. And then we actually took the sanctions on Pakistan. They had detonated a nuclear weapon and we sanctioned them. And part of that was we wouldn't send them any military equipment, we didn't have any face-to-face contact with them. And we had just taken those sanctions off. I was the first American to go to Pakistan and visit them. They took me up to the Khyber Pass, which is one of the most neat places in the world. But it's also very daunting, because this is the only way to get in between Pakistan and Afghanistan, or one of the only ways. And you can see that road. If you're a military planner, you're vulnerable, you know. And if you look at Afghanistan, this was a couple years ago again, but still, truth in lending, there were the majority of our injured soldiers in Afghanistan were from roadside bombs, called improvised explosive devices. One of the most horrific things I've ever seen. They have more young, I was with a bunch of them last night in Washington, D.C., injured troops that have survived. In Vietnam, about 9 out of 10 people that were injured traumatically on the battlefield died. In Afghanistan, it's 1 out of 10. Because the medical's got so much better. They have this thing called the first golden hour. If you can get to the person, even unbelievably injured person, within the first hour, you have about a 90% chance of living. Now, that's a wonderful thing. The problem is they're going to be, crippled or in need of medical care for the rest of their life. And we owe it to them. I read a report last week, it's going to be about $6 trillion for us to do that over the life of the young folks that are going to do that. On the other hand, 85% of those injuries came in convoys. And most of them came, 85% of the fuel taken into the battlefield was in convoy. So, what do you think? It doesn't take a lot of common sense. If the fuel is going in convoy and the convoys are being hit and killed, that's what the problem is. Part of it. You've got to find where they are. So, what we've done with the military has looked at is how do you decrease the fuel at the battlefield? In the battlefield, usage for each soldier in Afghanistan is 22 gallons of fuel per day. It's like filling your car. And it's military, so that's not a big deal, right? It usually costs, in some places, because you had to get out there by helicopter, $400 a gallon. That's 22 times 400 per person. And it's a lot of money. In 2008, when we had the recession and the energy prices went up, the U.S. military spent $11 billion additional on fuel they hadn't planned for, just because of the cost increase. So, everybody has their size and paradigm, but those are issues you need to think about. This is another picture of the guy with pass up there. The bottom one's kind of interesting. It just tells you what, I just think it's a neat story about what the military does. The bottom picture is Russian Marines laying a hose down. Now that's not a big issue, right? The hose they're laying down is from Kuwait to 92 miles into Iraq. That's a 92-mile long hose. That's how they got fuel in there. That's expensive. And plus it's very vulnerable, right? This is another one of the, issues that military people think about and you pay for in a way. The upper right-hand picture there is a pretty nice, or upper left-hand, I think, so you can face it, is an oil storage area. It's got all the nice grass. Looks like a putting green out there. That's in Lagos, Nigeria. Right across the river there is where the Nigerians live. They live in stilts and destitute. They have no electricity. They walk through other people's houses, no running water, no sewage, nothing. And again, I'm not an activist here. I'm just telling you this is what people see. I've been there. And so they look across there, and there's this grassy, beautiful place that they're storing oil. They're living in, whatever you want to call it. This is not a good thing. Why am I living like this? So the guys to the lower right are what's called the Militia for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta. They're a cartel that acted like Robin Hood initially. They were taking bunkering oil, which is basically tapping into the oil pipelines from in Nigeria, where the oil is. It goes down through a delta, through a series of pipes, and then go to barges, and the barges about this deeper water, fill up with a ship, and then it goes off to sell it. And these men guys were stealing the oil and then taking money and paying it to people like people living in these little destitute areas. Well, when I was in Germany in 2004, and we were tracking these guys, we found out they were making about $3.5 billion a year. They quit giving it out to the poor. It was a business. And they're kidnapping people to do that, Well, somebody mentioned Danny earlier, we're not getting that much energy from a place like the Middle East or Africa and stuff. In fact, by 2020, we had predicted we're going to get 25% of our import oil from Africa. And it's going to cost a lot. You go back to this interesting drilling off the coast of Africa. They're drilling down to 30,000 feet. It's high-tech stuff. Very expensive, very vulnerable. You're paying for it. The U.S. military is out there. We're out there helping protect it. Same thing with the pipeline from the Caspian Sea to Turkey, called the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline. 1,700 miles long, just like the Keystone. The U.S. is putting in $350 million to train those people along the pipeline, the militaries, to take care of the pipeline. You paid for that, whether you like it or not. So the fact of the matter is, this energy thing, you can have all the arguments you want, whether it's a good idea, bad idea, we need it all. And so that would be my main story, I guess. You can bring up the last slide, if you will. Is a couple things. Number one, it's not a simple issue. There isn't one solution. Everybody's got their favorite solution. You've got your shale oil favorites, you've got your drill offshore favorites, you've got your electric car favorites, you've got your, you name it, favorites. Biomass, ethanol, Chuck Hagel, interesting too. Had a rough go of it for confirmation that he was actually a really good person. When you use a senator from Nebraska, you go home and they say, hey, Senator, how you doing? What do you like to drink? He said, a glass of ethanol. So kind of funny, but ethanol, turned out to be not so cool. I mean, it's because, it doesn't, it's got a lot of problems with it. First of all, it doesn't have the same octane, costs a lot of money. It has a trickle-down effect because of the cost of feed and all that, et cetera, et cetera. First of all, the fact that you opened up the Senate to think about this is really good, President. I think that's awesome. Two is, we need young, smart people to think about it. I mean, they're really smart, our young folks. And three is, we need to give them a lot of money to do that educationally. Our number one asset in the world today for the United States is education, period, over now, nothing else. And that's what we ought to be thinking about. And we need to figure this out. So for me, being a military guy, I've got a master's in international relations, which I think is cool, but ends up being not so useful with the military, because I knew how to plan anyway. So I've talked to the chief of staff, I talked to the chairman of the JCS last night, and said, if I were you, what I would do, because the number one job for a service chief is not to fight wars, they train, organize, and equip. The combatant commanders out in the field fight, is to get really smart people to become leaders, make sure you train them, give them the right jobs and nurture them. They shouldn't be your friend, they ought to be people that are really good at this, don't be cliquish. Number two is I'd send them to get an MBA. And if the U.S. military doesn't figure out how to do economics pretty soon, they have no excuse. Because when you look at the things the military is going to be needed for, things like I just showed you up there, it's going to be instability around the world, places that have unstable governments that we're, either because of the fact that we can't stand it when there's a problem, we got to get there because we're good people in America and we're going to go, or it means something to us economically, we're going to go. So we've got to be ready for that. And when you look at our budget this year, before all the sequestration, our U.S. military budget this year was about $625 billion. And I love America. We have the military like that. But that's more than all the rest of the world spends in the military put together. So there's 192 countries in the world. We spend more than all the rest of the 191 put together. My personal feeling is I think we can afford to have a military with a little bit of a cut. It's got to be smart how you do it. Part of it is energy. And all these things that we're going to train our young folks for. So places like this, people like you need to tell the story. You need to get the word out. When you hear people saying, giving simple answers on things like this, you got to say, listen, I just heard Wald tell me this is impossible. So think about it. Anyway, thank you very much. I'll take questions if you want. Senator, we have time for questions? Can we do questions? I don't know if you want to get moving. Okay, I'm glad to.
If all options are on the table to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb, is one of the options a blockade that would prevent Iran from exporting its
That's a great question. Sounds like I do a whole bunch of things, and I guess I do. One of them is I'm on a group called the Bipartisan Policy Center, where we've done a study on what you're talking about, just the blockade, but what do you do about Iran? Chuck Brown, former senator from Virginia, is the co-chair, as well as Dan Gross, who's not back in the Senate. and our issue is to have the right kind of pressure on the Iranian regime, which these guys are, I guess this is Chatham House rules, right? Which means you can't tell the press, but my estimation is the Iranian leadership is totally crazy. I mean, people say they're rational. I don't think they're rational at all. Matter of fact, Dr. W&J, who's our president, the claim is, and I believe it, every morning when he wakes up, he says, there have been sighting of the 12th Imam yet. The 12th Imam, this is the difference and here's the problem with the Middle East. They're Shias and Sunnis. It's even more complicated than that. But Those are the main ones, right? The Sunnis, which happen to be Saudis or Qatar, places like that, majority, are basically, they believe Muhammad has arrived, and that's where Mecca is, and just like for Christians with Jesus, etc. The Shias, who are Iranians, believe the 12th Imam is the real Savior and hasn't arrived yet. This is the scary part for me. So they believe, the staunch Shias, that when the 12th Imam shows up, that's Armageddon. Now, if I'm having somebody like Dr. Nugent and I'm Israel saying, I wish Israel would leave the face of the earth and I would blow them up if I have to, or hit them with a nuke, then we say, it's a bunch of rhetoric. You know, we don't understand these guys. They might not, but they wouldn't be good for them to have it. So then the question is, wouldn't it be better to have a diplomatic result? Yes, it would be great. So then they say, well then why don't we just talk to the Iranians? Because they're illogical. We try it all the time. Number two, they say, let's do containment, like we do with Russia. Containment with Russia was with a partner, which that's kind of an interesting word with Russia, but an enemy, let's say, that thought similar to the way we did about life and things. So we had this kind of interesting, smart partner to have a containment with. So I don't think containment with Iran is a very good idea, plus it doesn't contain Saudi Arabia and everything else. So then you have to say, well, then they need to believe you'll do something about it, which means attack, which I think we burned our green stamp in Iraq on preemptive strikes. So the American public is not interested in another attack, before he goes. So they got to say, what are the steps you can take? I think we ought to have tough diplomatic. They ought to know that if we have to, we'll attack, which I'm not a fan of, but we could, and not invade. But you have to do some things first. And a blockade would be a good idea. Now, the only problem with blockade, which I'm a fan of, is that's an act of war, international. So once you blockade, you've declared war. So I think we should do that anyway, instead of, be a good idea, because I think the Iranian Navy is a bunch of baloney. I got a Navy friend here from Carnegie Mellon, here, their ROTC captain. And the Stennis carrier, when it left the Persian Gulf about 6-7 months ago, the Iranian head of the Navy said, don't come back. And it was kind of like some guy laying in the bar floor just got beat up. And the guy walks out and says, don't come back. And so they have a bunch of bluster. We could do a lot. I'm not advocating war, President, don't worry. But I think, they need to know we can do this. And a blockade would be a nice step. Now, we've got to be ready to go to war after that. So that's the issue.
We're getting serious, but one last.
All right, that's the hairy eyeball by
North Korea.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing with North Korea. I don't think they intend this. Is there anybody in here that's 26 years old? One. Okay. You're not going to be the president of Jefferson, Washington Jefferson School. You're too young. But the president of Korea is your age. Now, he didn't necessarily agree like you. He's kind of been isolated. He's kind of younger than you are, let's say. He's a 26-year-old guy that doesn't know anything about leading. He's never been in that position before. He's got these generals of depression. He's got to act tough. I don't think he has any intention of doing anything. The problem is miscalculation. Now, can they reach us with a nuke? No. They can't right now. I mean, they could eventually sometime, but right now we're okay. The problem is the north-south thing. They've got 14,000 artillery pieces. 14,000. These are the things that, not just one barrel thing, they're a multi-barrel 14,000 pointed at Seoul, Korea. And it'd be crazy. So I don't think they are going to do anything. I don't think they want to, but the words are pretty, bellicose. And a miscalculation would be a problem. But anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break.